Is Shadowdark's new Desert Rider class as broken as it seems? Find out today on RuneForged. Hey folks, I'm William. This is RuneForged. Welcome to the channel. This is the first in a series of videos where I'm going to be covering the Red Sands supplement for the Shadowdark Tabletop RPG. As the name implies, Red Sands is a desert-themed supplement that has a ton of new content for the game. Today's video is going to be centered around the new Desert Rider class, and in order to get a more holistic understanding of that class, we'll also be looking at some of the new weapon options, as well as the new rules for mounts. Also, be sure to stick around to the end of the video where I'll give you my final verdict on whether or not I think this class is absolutely busted, completely underpowered, or perfectly balanced, as all things should be. Alright, so I've got the Desert Rider class description pulled up here. Let's see what it says. Howling barbarians thundering across the sand on wild horses. Elven spies wielding curved blades atop silvery camels, or bandits wrapped in colorful silks, racing on sleek desert stallions. Very cool. I don't have any strong affinity for the Desert Rider class archetype, but this does seem like a pretty cool and interesting intro to the class. Yeah, so in terms of weapons here, we've got club, dagger, javelin, longsword, pike, shortbow, scimitar, spear, and whip. It does look like we've got a couple new weapons in the mix here. I believe the pike, the scimitar, and the whip are all new. And just looking at this list, it does. I feel like longsword and pike are kind of out of place. I don't really. When I think of like a stereotypical like desert rider, I don't really see them using like a knightly longsword or like a particularly long pike. I mean, I guess you could make the argument that the pike is maybe a stand-in for some sort of like lance. And while I don't necessarily associate lances with desert riders, I'm sure that they probably use them at some point, so it doesn't seem that far-fetched. While we're on the topic of weapons, let's go ahead and take a look at some of these new options for the desert rider. All right, so what's going on with the pike here? Okay, so the first thing I noticed right off the bat is it has a 2x close range. That's kind of like the reach ability that you typically see for polearm style weapons, so that makes sense to me. So I guess it has a melee range of roughly 10 feet, which checks out. Does really solid damage with 1d10, so that's pretty good. And it's two-handed and takes 2 slots. Okay. Yeah, it's kind of distinct from the lance, though, because it does say specifically that it requires 2 hands to use. And in my mind, I imagine lances is a one-handed weapon that you'd use along with a shield on horseback. So that's kind of an interesting inclusion. All right, next here, taking a look at the scimitar. Okay, so the interesting thing about the scimitar here that I'm seeing right off the bat is this is actually a finesse weapon that does 1d6 damage. And if I'm remembering correctly, like one of the only melee finesse weapons in the base Shadowdark rules is the dagger, which only does 1d4 damage. So this is actually an upgrade for dexterity-based melee player characters, and essentially looks like a direct upgrade from the dagger to the scimitar. So that's a really interesting choice. And what's even more interesting, I'm pretty sure like in the core rules, like there is a short sword and it does d6 damage, but I don't think that that weapon is a finesse weapon. So it's kind of curious to me that we're now seeing a d6 damage finesse weapon here in these optional rules, but I think it makes sense. With this new inclusion of the scimitar, I'm also pretty tempted to make the short sword a finesse weapon as well. But I guess that I have to sit down and really think about like what the implications of that would be. But yeah, interesting. And then the last new weapon here that the Desert Rider can use is the whip. Interesting. So it looks like it's both a melee and a ranged weapon, which is not unheard of. I think like the spear in the core rules also fits that criteria. Only does 1d4 damage, so not a ton of damage. And it's got the finesse property and then LA. What's LA? Lash. When you make a ranged attack with this weapon, it does not leave your grasp. Huh. I wonder what the implication of that is. Like, because it seems like it could make sense for it to just be a melee weapon and then have a range of near, and then it would still be getting the dexterity bonus from from the finesse property. I feel like there might be something about this rules interaction that I'm missing. So if you guys understand like what the implication is of making it a melee slash a ranged weapon, like let me know down in the comments because I'm not sure that I'm fully understanding the full implications of this being like kind of a melee slash range weapon. So really interesting there. Okay, so overall, I think that this weapon list is pretty good. The longsword and pike still seem a little bit strange to me, especially after we've now seen that the pike is two-handed, which to me makes it seem like it would be kind of difficult to use on horseback. In terms of the armor here, they got leather armor and shields. That seems perfectly fine to me. I definitely don't see desert riders being super heavily armored, so I think that plate would definitely be off the table. I think chain might be okay, but I think leather armor is probably the safer, more standard bet for the classic Desert Rider archetype. So that all seems fine to me. For hit points, they've got 1d8 per level. Makes sense. This looks like a pure martial class, so that checks out. The first special ability we see here is Charge. It says 3 times a day. You can charge into combat by moving at least near, so that's like 30 feet, before attacking. Each time you do this, your melee attacks deal double damage that round. Okay. I mean, that seems good to me. Charge makes sense from the perspective of this is something that you can use both while you are mounted and unmounted. But I do wonder, like, when it comes to like the core fantasy of what a desert rider is, or I guess this is really more just like a desert fighter in general. I feel like one of the core aspects of that fantasy is like hit and run tactics, being more of a skirmisher than a straight up melee brawler. So part of me is wondering if this would have been more thematic to see more of a like a hit and run ability here instead of charge. Um, but actually, like now that I'm thinking about it, you could actually use this charge in a hit and run kind of way. So like on turn one, you could charge into the enemy, get your special charge attack off. On turn two, you could then do a normal melee attack and then use your movement to get away from the combat. And assuming that the enemy doesn't follow you, you can like charge back in again on the third turn. So I guess that actually does incorporate like so there's like an implied play style with the charge ability that actually kind of um, feeds into the fantasy of the hit and run kind of tactics, so the skirmisher tactics. So I think I've actually like talked myself into liking this ability more than I did originally. So yeah, I think charge is pretty cool. I do think it's kind of interesting. Like it's limited to only 3 uses per day, and I can definitely understand like from a gameplay or mechanic standpoint, like you want to put some sort of limiter on it because it could be a pretty powerful ability. But also like part of me like is resisting the notion that this is something that like a person would only be able to do like a certain number of times per day. I mean, maybe it's kind of like a an exhaustion or fatigue thing, but this is kind of a martial ability that doesn't really seem to have a magical or a supernatural component to it. So putting a limit on the number of times per day that it can be used feels a little bit weird, but I do understand that at the end of the day, this is a game, and there needs to be some semblance of balance between the classes. And if the designer feels like this ability is too strong to be used on a whim, I guess I'm on board with seeing it have a limited number of uses. But I am thinking like if we do find out this class doesn't feel particularly strong, especially like compared to the fighter, for example, which seems like probably the most direct analogy. One of the things that I would consider, one of the knobs I would consider turning is maybe either increasing the amount of days, the amount of times per day that you could use the charge ability, or maybe even experimenting with just removing the limitation altogether and see how that works out. But yeah. Anyway, moving on to the next thing, mount. Okay, yeah, this checks out. So it says common, camel, or horse. So maybe the implication is that there are different levels of camels and horses. Maybe there's like a built-in progression system with the mounts. Like you start with kind of a basic one, but you have the opportunity to get cooler or more powerful ones later on, which would be kind of cool. With a reliable or lovely demeanor. I mean, I guess we don't really know what that means yet. We'll have to look at the rules for that in a minute. It comes when you call and never spooks. Okay, so I wonder if there's going to be rules for like spooking when it comes to mounts. That would make sense to me. You can only have one such mount at a time. Yeah, that's a good rule. When riding your mount, you both get a bonus to AC equal to half your level round down. Interesting. It says round down, but it doesn't say a minimum of 1. So I guess you don't get any AC bonus at level 1, which is, a little unfortunate, but I guess it just gets more powerful as you go, so that seems fine. Your mount has additional levels equal to half your level, round down. I wonder what the implication of that is. I wonder if your mount like gains HP as it levels or something. We'll have to see. You can freely leap on or off your mount once per round. Yeah, that seems really cool. That's very thematic and fitting for a class like this, and I don't think it's like particularly overpowered or anything like that. So cool flavor. Doesn't seem to break the class, so seems good to me. If you lose your mount, you can use your downtime to acquire and train another. Pass a DC 15 Charisma check for the new creature to become your mount. Okay. Lower the DC 1 step each attempt. Cool. I like that. I think that's really good. I like the part at the end there, especially where if you fail to do it a couple times, it gets easier and easier until eventually you will probably get it. So that's good. So we're definitely going to have to dig in and see more about the mount special rules. But I do have to admit, I'm not sure how I feel about the mount special ability off the bat. I don't know. For some reason, it feels really weird to give the PCs a mount at level 1. I don't know exactly why I feel that way. Um, I think part of it is probably to do with the fact that getting a mount for your character is it almost feels like a rite of passage that you get after you've had a little bit more experience in your adventures, and giving one right off the bat just seems a little bit weird. I do also think about like what is the implication of giving a PC a mount at level 1. I imagine it does cause them to move faster. It would make sense to me that they'd be able to carry more. And I wonder, like, is that does that break the game in some way? But then also, like on the flip side, I think about like, well, like, can you actually take a mount into a dungeon? Like, does that make sense? Intuition tells me that that probably isn't going to work out. It feels really weird to have like a mount in a dungeon. That just doesn't seem right. So you now have this situation where when the desert rider is on their mount, they're probably pretty strong because they're faster, they're able to carry more. They eventually get a bonus to their armor class, which is all cool. But when they're not on their mount, I wonder if they feel really weak because they're actually effectively losing like half of the abilities of their class by not being mounted. Yeah, it's just a really interesting situation. And to be fair, like I do think that is cool, and I like that it's kind of situational. Like, okay, well, when you're in your environment with your resources available, you're really strong, and without those things, you're a little bit weaker. So I don't think that that is inherently wrong, but I'm curious to see like how that ends up playing out at the table. So I'll say that I'm a little cautiously skeptical about the mount special ability, but we'll read on and we'll reserve judgment. I'm also curious to know like what kind of dynamic it's going to create if one of the characters has a mount and the other ones don't. Because in some ways it's like it's kind of an imbalance, but it's not necessarily a bad thing because it could also serve the entire party that they have more inventory space or whatever, assuming that's a thing, which I can't imagine it's not. But also, I wonder if we're going to see more situations where, like, the Desert Rider is going to be going off on their own, like separating from the party, which again is not necessarily a bad thing, but it does have implications for kind of how you're going to run the table and how much spotlight you're giving to various different characters. So I don't know. It's just something that feels a little off to me intuitively. But again, I think we should just wait and reserve judgment until we see more of the mounting rules, and then also like probably also need to see how this actually plays out at the table. All right. So looking at the Desert Rider talents here, it looks like the first one here is you can use any rider-bearing creature as your mount. Hmm. So I guess I should acknowledge, like right off the bat, like this is very cool, and I definitely think there are players who are playing as desert riders who are going to be like, yeah, I want to tame the most exotic mount that I can and ride it into battle, and that is very cool. And I think that I need to acknowledge that like part of it first. But thinking about this from a GM perspective, man, that is really opening a door to some pretty crazy shenanigans. And I know, like, you can step in and be like, well, no, you can't chain that mount, or you can create some sort of other artificial limitation. But I am kind of worried that this is creating an expectation that, as a GM, I'm not sure that I can. I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to fulfill the complete fantasy that is implied with this talent. So I'm definitely going to have to give that particular talent some serious thought. And again, to be fair, like you only get this on a roll of a 2, so it's like a really small percentage chance that this even comes up. But just by having a Desert Rider in the game, like you have to acknowledge that this is a possibility. This could happen. So that is something that I have to give a little bit more thought to. So I guess overall, very cool, but I'm a little bit worried about the implication of what that looks like in practicality. The rest of these look pretty standard. Okay, here's one. Gain an additional use of your charge talent each day. I think that's pretty good. I think we talked about it a little bit earlier, but it does feel a little bit weird for charge to have a limited number of usage, like charges or whatever. And an additional usage or 2 per day, I don't think it's going to break anything. So I think that's a good one. And the rest of these look very standard, so no complaints about that. All right, let's take a look at the new mount special rules that are included with the supplement and try to get a feel for what impact this is going to have not only on the Desert Rider class, but on the game as a whole. All right, mounts include beasts of burden and creatures with riders. Okay. All humanoids can ride common and uncommon mounts. Rare mounts like Scrag require special training to ride. Okay. I don't know what a Scrag is, but that seems interesting and cool to me. It makes sense that all humanoids should be able to ride at least common mounts. I don't know what an uncommon mount is in this context, but that seems fine. And then I like the fact that there are rarer, presumably more powerful mounts that you require additional training in order to be able to ride. So I think that's cool. I also kind of like that it implies some sort of sense of progression with mounts as well. You don't just start off with a really incredible mount right off the bat, and you maybe start off with an okay mount, and then you, like anything else in the game, you can either level it up or acquire new or more powerful ones over time. I think that's a cool inclusion. Okay, here's a section about gear. Mounts have a number of gear slots equal to 5 times their strength bonus. That is a lot of gear slots, but I think that makes sense given like the purpose of mounts. A rider and the rider's carry gear, such as backpack and worn items, occupy 10 slots. Okay, I mean, I think that seems pretty reasonable. I like the fact that this addresses that the rider and their gear has some sort of weight or bulk to them, but doesn't like it doesn't force you to actually like calculate or recalculate the amount of weight that the mount is carrying every time the rider like mounts and dismounts. So you don't have to get really specific with how many slots the rider has filled. It's just a flat 10. I think that's totally fine. All right, movement here. When riding a mount, you use its speed instead of your own. That makes sense. Push. When traveling, a rider can push a mount to move a number of additional 6-mile hexes each day equal to its con bonus. That makes sense. Push mount must pass a DC 12 con check or be unable to travel the next day. The DC increases 1 step for each consecutive day of pushing. Yeah, that makes sense. I like this a lot. It makes sense from like a narrative and a simulationist perspective, while also being relatively concise and rules light, or I guess being extremely concise and rules light. So I have no problems with this. I think that's great. All right, combat. Most mounts bearing a rider can't attack in combat, okay? However, a mount of level 7 plus may make 1 attack on its rider's turn. Interesting. Most mounts bearing a rider can't attack in combat. Okay, and I definitely understand that from the perspective of like, it feels like one of Shadowdark's like core design philosophies is that player characters are only making 1 attack on their turn. And there are very few, if any, exceptions to this throughout the rest of the rules. So that first sentence makes a lot of sense to me. But this next part, however, a mount of level 7 plus will make 1 attack on its rider's turn. This is actually a pretty major paradigm shift or a pretty major exception to the Shadowdark core rules. And it's a really interesting exception. I wonder what the thought process was behind this change. I don't dislike it. I'm curious to know like why mounts? Like why was it the mount special rule that was an exception to this, and whereas you don't see things like dual wielding or you don't see pets usually that have attack action. Why was it mounts that was the thing that's like, okay, this is the mechanic where we're going to decide that a PC can take multiple attacks in their turn. Very, very interesting. I do like the fact that that it's relative to the mounts level. I think that's pretty interesting, and it also adds context to the rule that we saw earlier about mounts gaining levels as their riders gain levels. So that's pretty interesting and makes a lot of sense to me. That adds that sense of progression and unlocking additional abilities over time. So I think I'm okay with that. I am curious to see how this plays out at the table, especially if all of the PCs are getting mounts at some point, and especially if they're all getting like epic or high level mounts. This is effectively going to double the amount of time that their turns take, which I think with a small group is probably fine. But if you're running with like 6 people and they have 6 mounts, like that's going to significantly increase the amount of time that combat takes. So there's a trade-off there. It probably won't happen a ton, or it'll only happen at higher levels, so it's probably not that big a deal. But it is something to think about when you're running your game. All right, getting on or off a mount uses up the rider's movement. I'm okay with that. That makes sense to me. And it also gives some additional utility to the Desert Rider ability that lets them hop on and off their mount for free. I think it's once per turn. So I think that's good. I think that's creating another way in which Desert Riders are superior to other people who may have mounts. And I think that's good. A mount unaccustomed to fighting might spook during combat. The first time it or its rider is wounded, it must make a morale check. Yeah, I think that's great. Again, this is adding a sense of realism, but it's also, again, very concise and rules light, so I'm here for it. I think that's a solid rule. Moving on. All right, food and water. Warm-blooded mounts must consume rations equal to their base level each day. Do not include bonus levels, okay? Camels and cold-blooded mounts must only do this once per week. Okay, yeah, I really, really like this. One, I like the fact that mounts consume rations. I think that is a good counterbalance to the fact that mounts do make Desert Riders and other PCs who have mounts more powerful. And also it adds some additional realism without adding a bunch of new rules, because it works basically very similarly to the way that player characters consume food and water. So I think that's great. And then I do also like this additional part where camels and cold-blooded mounts only have to use 1 ration per week. Yeah, that just makes sense to me. I think it's a cool reason to have a camel, or like I guess I don't know, like a cold-blooded mount, like a lizard maybe, like a dragon. Is a dragon's cold-blooded? Anyway, not relevant. I think it's a cool way to have certain mounts, differentiate certain mounts from one another, and hopefully we'll end up seeing that there's some advantage to using horses. Maybe they're faster or something than a camel. So hopefully there's some advantage to using a horse over a camel, but I like the fact that there are different types of mounts probably have different use cases and pros and cons. I think that's good design. So well done. All right, mounts can go 3 days beyond their limit without water and 3 weeks beyond their limit without food. After that, they take 1d8 damage per day. They can't be healed until a full feeding of food or water. Okay, makes sense. No complaints about that. I think that's a good rule. All right, scrolling down here to look at the different mount choices. Okay, so we've got actually a lot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8. So we've got 8 different mount options. I think that's a good amount of variety, assuming that there are good reasons to choose one mount over another. So we'll see if that's the case. It looks like there is a pretty significant difference between the cheapest and most expensive mounts. We got a donkey for 40 gold pieces, an elephant for 400 gold pieces. Okay. Some of these spook and some of them don't, so that's a good point of differentiation. I like that. There's different rarities, so some of these are probably harder to find, which I think is a good counterbalance. And then some of these have different properties. So we've already seen that camels have an advantage over probably most other mounts because they require fewer rations in order to feed, which is cool. And then here we look at the horse. It's the same price as the camel. They both spook. They're both common, but the horse has advantage on morale checks. Okay, that's interesting. I think we're probably also going to have to go in and look at the stats for the various different mounts just to get a feel for if there's some sort of stat difference. I feel like horses should be able to go faster than camels, but I guess I don't actually know that. It's just intuition that tells me that, and I wonder if that's going to be included, or if it really is just going to be like, okay, well, camels require less food, but horses are harder to spook. And I guess that would be fine. One thing that I do find interesting here is that it doesn't list like the camels needing less food here in the property section. I think it would be really nice if it was included there. My only guess is that it probably didn't fit very easily on the table, but I think it would be nice to have it included there if it would fit, so you could see at a glance, like you could more easily see at a glance the differences between the various different mounts. So, but that's a nitpick. Silver camel doesn't spook, okay, and that's more expensive. That's fine. 150 gold for something that doesn't spook, and it's rare. That's probably fine. And spooking is probably pretty bad if that happens to you in combat, so not being able to spook is probably pretty good. Elephant, 400 gold pieces, doesn't spook, rare. I wonder if elephants have like really nasty stats. And I also wonder what level they are. Like if they're level 7, there's no way the elephant's level 7, right? We're going to have to look at that later, but I doubt an elephant's level 7. But they probably get level 7 faster than the other ones because they probably start at a higher base level. So I bet they have really high strength and constitution, so they probably carry a ton. And they can probably be pushed a lot easier than the other mounts can. So that makes sense that it's expensive. Warhorse doesn't spook. Oh, and it can wear armor. Interesting. Okay. And that's only for 50 more gold pieces, so that's pretty significant. And one thing I'm thinking about now, I think it was referenced earlier, but I'm just now understanding the implication of it. Like the horse and the rider are actually like 2 separate entities. And the horse can be targeted by enemies and probably taken out. So that's really interesting. So being able to have them wear armor is probably pretty effective. All right, scrag. I don't know. I still don't know what a scrag is. 150 gold pieces. It does spook. It's uncommon. I have to assume that this is some sort of cold-blooded thing, right? Because I don't think they would have called that out if it wasn't important. So I'm going to assume this is some sort of cold-blooded animal, and therefore has similar properties to the camel in terms of not needing to feed as often, which would be good. It must also have like good stats or something because it's way more expensive than the camel, and that would be like I think the closest point in comparison. So we need to go look at what the scrag stat block looks like so we get a better understanding of why this is good. And there's also a war scrag, pretty expensive, rare, doesn't spook, and can wear armor. Okay, that makes sense. Cool. All right, mount personality, 2d6 plus charisma modifier. Okay. Horrid, rebellious, stubborn, and malicious. Okay. Ornery, only likes owner, sassy and rude. I like that one. Reliable, steadfast, obedient, protective, lovely, loyal, sweet, and affectionate. And we did see that the desert rider gets either a reliable or a lovely mount. That's really interesting. I wonder if they have to roll, and if they just roll lower than reliable, they get a reliable mount, or if they're able to choose. I think I'd probably make them roll. And like, why would you? And because if you could choose, like, why would you ever choose a reliable mount over a lovely mount? And also, like, what? I mean, I guess I should back up. Like, what is even the implication of Mount's personality? I wonder if this is. I wonder if this has some sort of gameplay or mechanical implication, or if this is really just more like role play or flavor. Um, Interesting. I wonder if we're gonna see. I wonder if we're gonna see more on that later. All right, let's mount gear. Okay, we just got. Looks like we got the various different armors, and they're pretty expensive. Okay. Yep, this all makes sense. This all makes sense. 2 slots, 3 slots. Okay. Mithril armor. All right. Metal only, -1 slot. Okay. Normal, stealth, and swim. Okay, makes sense. Saddle. Rider advantage on checks to stay mounted. Yep, that checks out. 1 free for mounts carry. Yep, that makes sense. 30 gold doesn't seem too crazy. So I like that. That's cool. I like when equipment has mechanical implications, even when it's like simple or like mundane stuff like a saddle. So I really like this. I think this is cool. A plus. Wagon, 120 gold, no rider on mount, move at half speed, plus 15 gear slots, limit 1 per mount. Okay, cool. 120 gold feels not very expensive for a wagon. Maybe I'm crazy. That doesn't feel very expensive, but I mean, it's really not that big a deal. but like the thought of like an entire party of player characters having a wagon and just being able to cart back a ton of stuff is kind of crazy. But I mean, they can't ride on it at the same time. Wait, no rider on mount. You can't have a rider. You can't have a rider on a wagon. I don't know. That seems kind of weird. Like you could have probably multiple riders on a wagon. Or are they saying, that you can't have a rider on the mount, but you can have it on the wagon? I don't know. That feels kind of strange. I'd have to really think about. I'd really have to think about how I would want to implement that, because it would make sense that you could probably put the whole party on a wagon. But if they each take up 10 gear slots, they probably I'm not sure they'd be able to do that. I wonder if you could have, can you have multiple could you have multiple mounts pulling one wagon, and would that increase the amount of carrying capacity? I think that I would want more rules around the wagon, or at least I would need to spend some time thinking about how I want to implement that. That seems a little bit wonky, and it might need a little bit more fleshing out. But let me know if y'all have run wagons in your games. Let me know if you ran them rules as written, or if you made some house rules to accommodate, like a different play style or whatever. I'm curious to know how other people are handling that. All right, we are also going to look at some of the monster stat blocks here for some of these mounts, just to kind of get a feel for what we're working with. So let's actually start with the donkey, because that probably feels like it should be the weakest one. So they only move near, so that's not really an improvement over what a PC can move. They are pretty strong at +3, so that's good. They have a decent constitution at +2, and they are level 1. And we can go ahead and compare that to. Is there just a normal camel in here? There's no normal camel. I wonder if that's in the core rules. We have to go look at that later. All right, silver camel. Rare camels with soft silvery hair and affable dispositions. Okay. I wonder if that means that they all are lovely on the disposition chart. Um, Interesting. Okay. So they've got a spit attack. That's kind of cool. Not relevant if they're being ridden, but I think that's funny. They move double near, so they are fast. So these are fast creatures, and that makes me wonder, like, is a horse also double near, or is horse like triple near? I'd be curious to see that. So strength, they're roughly as strong as the donkey, so they can carry roughly the same weight. Wow, they have way higher constitution. That's kind of nutty. And they are a level higher, so they'll reach level 7 faster, so they can start attacking faster than the donkey can. Okay, so here's a warhorse. Muscular destriers. I actually have no idea how that word's pronounced. Trained to carry warriors into combat. They move double near. Okay, so they are the same speed as a camel. I don't know how I feel about that. I feel like horses should be faster, but maybe I just don't know my animals very well. So that is a possibility. Strength +3. Okay, so they're like equally strong to the other mounts we've seen so far. Not very super high constitution. They've got like the same as a donkey, so they don't have as high a constitution as camels do. Okay, I mean that feels like camels are just kind of better, especially if you get the silver camel. Don't think can be spooked, so it doesn't need to make morale checks. So it really does seem like the silver camel is like the way to go. What else we got? A scrag. Let's go see what a scrag is. Tan monitor lizards as large as cows. Okay, that makes sense. They scamper low to the ground on wall clinging feet. Oh, that's cool. Oh, they can climb. Okay, I mean that's kind of sick. They only move near instead of double near. Okay, I like that. I think that's a good balancing mechanism. So they are less strong than the other mounts, and they're not particularly hardy in terms of constitution, so that's fine. They are level 2. Okay, I mean that's fine. That's cool. I like this. I think this is a good balance of different mount options. And then right below we've got the War Scrag. It's got more hit points. It's got a better attack bonus. Same movement. It's a little bit stronger. Same constitution, and it's level 3, so it'll hit level 7 faster. Okay. I mean, I don't have any complaints about this. I actually think that like a lot of thought went into how to balance these various different mounts and also to create like a sense of progression with them. So I really have no complaints about these mounts so far. So good job with that. I think that's really well done. I forgot. I wanted to go back and look at the mounts from the core rules to see how they stack up. So I got the camel here. Ornery, tan fur, desert beast. I wonder if that like has an implied. I wonder if like basic camels are just ornery according to the disposition chart. I might make that a rule anyway because I think that's kind of funny. Strength +3, Constitution +3, fine. Level 2. Okay, so I mean that's pretty normal. We need to go see what a horse. We need to use the horse as our reference. Let's go find that. All right, here's horse. Powerful, swift herd animals that roam open plains. Cool. Strength 3. Okay, so they move double near. So I mean that's what we expected, but that's also like what camels move. So you know, strength +3, Constitution +2, level 2. Okay. Okay. So it does seem like the default mount is kind of like a level 2 mount. Double near, strength 3, constitution between 2 and 4. Okay, I mean that's a good baseline. Let's go back and see elephant. Okay, here's elephant. Mighty mammals with tough hide, floppy ears, and a trunk. Yep, checks out. Man, these are some beefy boys. So they don't move very fast, which makes sense. They have 2 tusk attacks. Oh, they are level 7. Oh no, boys, they're level 7. Oh, that's scary. That means they can attack. Okay, so they've got 2 tusk attacks +6. I can't believe that elephants are level 7. That's crazy. But I guess like it makes sense in the fact that Shadowdark is kind of a lower powered world. And I mean elephants are really big and strong, so I mean they're probably pretty formidable. Just I never expected an elephant would be level 7. That's crazy. Okay, +6 to hit, 1d8 damage, 2 attacks, nasty. Strength +5, so they can carry a ton. So is that 5 times 5, 25 slots? Okay, that's kind of gross. Constitution +3, so they're pretty hardy. They can push them probably level 7, man. And they have charge. Move up to double near. Oh wow. Move up to double near in a straight line and make 1 tusk attack if hit times 3 damage. Man, that is brutal. Dude, elephants are really nasty. And I think they were only 400 gold, which is not like that much more expensive than the other. I mean, it is like 4 times more expensive or 8 times more expensive, but in the grand scheme of like how much gold that characters are going to get, like man, they're all going to have elephants. But I guess so. I guess the counterpoint is that they are all rare, so it would take specialized training in order for them to be able to ride the elephant. So that does make things a little bit better. But man, can you imagine if your entire party has elephants? That's a pretty significant increase in power. And there's nothing to say that they couldn't get an elephant like early on. It's not like they have to actually like go down and track one down. But I guess you could also just limit and say, hey, okay, yeah, there are no elephants for sale here. You're gonna have to actually go get one yourself, and that would actually like be a cool little quest. And they're also super tough, so don't mess up. Overall, I'm pretty satisfied with the variety of mounts that are offered in this new supplement. I think 8 mounts is more than sufficient. I like the fact that there does seem to be a sense of progression with the mounts. Starting with kind of the lowly donkey and working all the way up to the elephant. And I also think there's like some interesting choices to be made in terms of which mount that you choose to use. Different mounts have different strengths and weaknesses, so I think that's pretty good. I think that if I had any critiques to make on the mount section, it would be that I don't think I see a good enough reason to use horses over camels, which definitely does make sense in a desert environment, but I feel like the camel is better for like the wrong reasons. So I think the main advantage of the horse is that it gets advantage on morale checks, but the higher tier of mounts don't spook anyway, so it's not particularly relevant. But intuition tells me that maybe the horse should move a little bit faster than the camel. Maybe not in the desert. Okay, like I concede that probably the camel is almost certainly the better mount in the desert, but I feel like horses should move faster than camels. I probably need to check. Actually, you know what? You guys tell me. Are camels just as fast as horses in real life, or are they comparably fast? I'm really curious to know because right now it does seem like camel is just like the clear winner over the horse. Okay, I did just notice something though. The war horse can wear armor, and the silver camel, which is kind of like the rough equivalent, cannot. So that probably does have some implications in terms of gameplay. Maybe that does give the warhorse significantly more survivability than the camel in a combat situation. So maybe it does. Maybe it does even out in some way. And then also like the camel is more expensive, and it is the silver camel is rare too. I didn't even see that. So you do need specialized training in order to ride it. So I actually take back all of my criticisms comparing the camel and the horse to one another. So I actually do think those are fairly well balanced. So I guess then that leaves my only criticism being the elephant. The elephant does seem really, really strong, especially considering it starts at level 7 and therefore is able to attack on the PC's turn. That seems very, very strong. I think I'd have to watch out for that in my own campaign. I feel like that would just be such a massive power spike for the characters, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it might trivialize some of the content. And again, I understand this is Shadowdark. It's a very different game for 5th edition. I don't have to be as concerned about balancing encounters, but man, that is a huge amount of power for only 400 gold. And then I guess the limiter here is the specialized training. So I guess you could turn the dial a little bit on how hard it is to get advanced like riding skill or whatever. But again, the desert rider gets that for free if they roll a 2 on their class talent chart, or at least that's my interpretation of it. But yeah, so elephants look pretty scary and dangerous. But I guess the upside is you can also have the enemies use elephants against your characters. So that's a plus. But yeah, so I guess my overall thoughts on mounts, it looks pretty good. I think there is more than enough variety here to keep players interested. It does seem like there's a really strong sense of progression here with the mounts. Like you could start with a donkey, work your way up to a horse, then a war horse, and then ultimately all the way up to an elephant. And I think that's really cool. I also think that even like on the same like kind of tier of mount, you have some interesting choices to make about like what kind of abilities you want that mount to have, like comparing the camel to the horse to the scrag. I think there's interesting decisions to be made there, and I think they're relatively well balanced. So I feel pretty good about that. The Desert Rider is actually a really interesting class in that I think it feels very, very strong when it has access to its mount and in an environment where mounts are very useful. And it feels significantly weaker when it doesn't have its mount or it's not in the correct terrain. And honestly, I think that's a pretty good balance. I'm not really upset about that at all. As a matter of fact, I'd actually be more concerned that if it was a very dungeon-heavy game, I'd actually be a little bit concerned about this class being underpowered, in a dungeon environment. So if it ever did get to the point where I felt like a lot of these sessions were being spent in an area where the mount wasn't particularly relevant, I might apply some balance tweaks to the Desert Rider to make them a little bit stronger. And I think I would go back to my original point that I talked about in the Desert Rider section where, maybe there's some tweaking we can do with the charge ability and either increase the amount of charges that they get per day, or, even wilder is completely remove the limitation on how often they can charge. And especially in a game where maybe they don't have access to their mount as much during combat, I think that might be a pretty effective balance change and would also kind of bring it in line with my feelings about how martial abilities should work and how like maybe they should be a little bit less limited. Like maybe they shouldn't use a limited times per day system the same way that like magic or supernatural abilities do. So I think I could find a way to work that in and not have it be completely busted. But yeah, so overall, like a little bit to my surprise, because I'm not super invested in the Desert Rider archetype or the mount special rules, I found that these were really great. I really like the Desert Rider. I really like the mount system, and I'm looking forward to reading through the rest of this Red Sands Cursed Scroll. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more content like it in the future, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Also, please consider checking out this next video, which includes more of my thoughts on the Cursed Scroll series. I think that about wraps up for now. Thank you so much for watching, and have a wonderful day. Bye.